The sound of a door slamming shut tore me out of my dreams. My heart pounded as I leapt to my feet. My hazy vision settled on Ethan's mom trudging in with 2 gallons of milk from the morning delivery. I grumbled as I chastised myself for startling so easily. I plopped back into the couch. Ethan's snoring stirred a steady ire within. I tossed a pillow at him, which only earned an annoyed mumble from him. The glow from the morning flooded through the windows. I tried in vain to sleep in, but I gave up and reached for the remote instead and switched it to Fox. The morning cartoons were on, which seemed to be enough to wake Ethan as he groggily watched the screen. The Warners chased the shrink around the studio lot to a catchy song. Explosive ads loudly shouting about new games and super soakers barged in. I tuned out what I could and turned to Ethan. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" I asked. Ethan contorted his body in the beanbag. "No? Why?" I shrugged dismissively. Nothing. Just wondering." I looked towards that curtained window. I couldn't stop myself from gazing outside. I inched forward and slowly peeled the curtains away and peered out across that street once again. The dog was gone, like he had only been a figment of my dreams. The driveway now housed a well-kept Ford diesel truck. An old man sat alone on the porch. A thick cigar was tucked in between his teeth. He pulled a brown work jacket around his frame. A sun-bleached Winchester hat and duck camo was pulled low over his brow. The stitching had already lost its luster years ago. An empty rocking chair sat next to him. It looked meticulously cared for, like it had just gotten a new coat of paint. A crocheted blanket was neatly folded across the armrest. The glow from the smoldering tobacco flickered in the rising sun. Mr. Crawford's car pulled into the street and parked in the driveway. Ethan's dad got out with 2 plain cartons from the donut shop in town. He offered away the Mr. Mueller across the way and received a short nod from the old man. His dad bustled inside and jovially announced that he had brought donuts. We both sprang up from the beanbags and pursued the confectionaries to the kitchen table. "Leave some bear claws to your mother," he reminded Ethan before we could open the boxes. Ethan's mom smiled at us gently from across the kitchen counter as she filled 2 mugs from the coffee pot. The 2 boxes of donuts were laid out on the dining room table with a pitcher of orange juice and napkins flanking it. We both took our share of our sugar load and hurried back into the den to keep watching the morning cartoon. Ethan, of course, grabbed the donut with the most colorful sprinkles, much to my dismay. We lazily flipped through channels and burned the morning away to the best of our ability. Once the morning cartoons had finished their course, my friend turned to me with a smile. "Want to see something cool?" I nodded and he smiled wider. "Come on, I'll show you." He led me to the crowded garage, suffocated with Sharpie-labeled boxes. Ethan reached behind his dad's workbench and pulled out something I can only feel envious of, a Daisy BB gun. Ethan grinned gleefully as he posed with his Model 25. "Cool, huh? Want to test it out?" "Sure," I replied excitedly. This new experience filled me with a newfound curiosity. He grabbed a tin of metal BBs and dashed out of the garage. Ethan's dad glanced up at him from the newspaper as he sat in his recliner. The big TV droned on in the background. "You gonna go shoot cans with that?" Ethan bobbed his head a few times and his dad leaned back and nodded in approval. "Alright, just don't be shooting any birds or near the neighbors." "Okay, Dad." His dad adjusted his feet and flipped through the newspaper as we walked past Mrs. Crawford chattering away at the kitchen from the wall phone while she paced with the cord pulled to its limits. We stepped out into the wide deck overlooking the covered pool. I hardly saw him use it, and it only seemed to collect mosquitoes and leaves for most of the year. The dreaded trampoline huddled nearby that had gifted many bruises and mishaps over the years. Ethan set up various cans and bottles for us to plink. He eagerly loaded up the Daisy and shot down the first can. He let me try a few times. The pump was awkward at first for me to use, but I eventually got the hang of it. Out past the edges of the manicured green grass of his backyard, a line of barbed wire separated a farmer's field. The prairie was patchy and brown in the early thaw. A mischief of magpies hopped around and pecked at a covered bale of silage. The dark shape of a crow dropped down on top of the bale. The magpies scattered into the wind with annoyed squawks. The larger bird pecked a few times at the feed below it before settling its gaze on us as we struck down more bottles. The bird took off and flew closer to us. When it settled on a new perch on the old cottonwood, I noticed how large it really was. Its heavy wings whooshed, and the barren branches dipped under the weight. It was much larger than any crow I had ever seen. Its chest too broad, its wings too wide. The raven ruffled his throat feathers as it tilted its head and observed us carefully. Ethan looked up as he inserted a newly loaded tube in. "That bird's huge," he muttered, and I offered a nod of agreement. The crack of the BB gun not even bothering it at all. It let out a series of strange-sounding clicks and knocks from its angular beak. It preened itself for a moment before rubbing its beak against the nearby branch, completely stripping it of the soft green buds, one by one. Ethan preoccupied himself with hitting the furthest can. The corvid went still and raised its head to the sky. It let out a sound that was normally just a background noise, as unremarkable as someone clearing their throat before speaking. It let out the sound of a man's dry cough. Ethan went still and turned around slowly with a puzzled look on his face. "Was that?" He wasn't able to finish his sentence as the trees thrashed violently as the raven suddenly took off. The large bird quickly summited the roof and disappeared behind the house. Ethan stared at me for a second. He then turned and started to pack away his little rifle. "Maybe we should go inside for a bit," he half mumbled, and I silently agreed and followed him back inside. He tucked the weapon back in its original spot and stared at a dusty splitting axe resting against the workbench. "You wanna, grab some pop from the drugstore?" I nodded quickly, liking the idea of being away from the house for a little bit. We put on our coats in the mudroom and gathered our bikes. Our pedals carried us through the winding roads all the way down to the drugstore on the corner. A short line of pickup trucks were parked just outside the brick-and-mortar building along the sidewalk. Neon signs were plastered across the wide windows, reading Ravenwood Drugs. The wind howled, carrying the scent of rain as we stowed our bikes. I looked up to see a line of ashen-gray clouds methodically descending upon the skyline. We pushed our way through the glass door, the bell chiming behind us. One of the girls Casey hangs around with leaned on the counter by the register. She idly chewed on some gum and filed her nails. The blonde smiled and waved at us with one hand. The wire racks of magazines and greeting cards spun ever so slightly under the fan above. The obnoxious sound of the malt machine whining from the soda fountain drew us to the counter. We brushed past shelves of cough syrup and toothpaste and sat down along the row of bolted stools. Emma sat in the furthest stool away. She idly kicked her feet as they hung off the floor, crayon in hand as she worked dutifully on a small pile of Barbie coloring sheets. A Shirley Temple with extra cherries bubbled away in a tall glass beside her. She seemed content to ignore my presence, as usual. Casey faced away from us as she worked the machine. She looked over her shoulder and flashed a smile, her scrunched ponytail bobbing in place. "Hey, you two. Be with you in a sec," she called out as she talked over the machine's clamor. She poured the contents of the metal mixing cup into a fluted glass and stuck a large spoon into the metal cup. She set both on the counter in front of an old man in a Stetson. He looked up from his newspaper and thanked her. He gazed out the window and squinted at the approaching clouds. "Weather's turning," he half mumbled before taking a sip from the vanilla malt straw. Casey wiped her hands on her short apron and turned to us. Her new band shirt caught my eye almost instantly. The dark shirt was covered in strange symbols, interlaced with skulls and spikes. Stylized letters spelled out Celtic frost. It looked like something from the levels of doom. I asked for a root beer float, and Ethan ordered a chocolate float. He murmured something about his dad liking them when I gave him a strange look. Casey mixed all the syrups in the glasses and stirred in the soda water from the jug. She scooped in some ice cream and set out both glasses on saucers in front of us. I spooned out some foam from the glass and brought out my Game Boy. I fussed with unraveling the linking cable for a minute before nudging Ethan to link up. He took out his own Game Boy and powered it up. We competed against each other in Tetris, racing to stack blocks in neat rows. The floats melted as daylight burned away. Just as Ethan was about to gloat over his victory, a new form sat down at the counter. The sound of heavy boots and keys jingling announcing the new arrival. "Hey, Clyde." A familiar voice greeted me. I turned to see Aunt Jan still in her gray and blue patrol uniform, the sheriff's star still shining on her jacket. She adjusted her duty belt as she pulled down her tinted aviators to smile at me. "Hi, Aunt Jan," I said warmly, feeling a little more at ease with her presence. "Staying out of trouble, young man?" She said with a smirk as Casey had already set a mug down and started filling it with coffee without being asked. "For now," I replied, feigning my best evil grin. She chuckled and shook her head. "You always were a handful to babysit." The deputy stirred in some sugar from the shaker. A slice of flathead cherry pie with a dollop of cream was set out beside the steaming mug. "Maybe a little," I admitted with a sheepish smile. "He still is these days," Casey added with a toothy grin as she scrubbed off the flat-top grill. I let out a long sigh of defeat and buried my sorrows in ice cream and root beer. I emptied the glass and felt Jan's hand ruffle my hair and remind me to be nice to my sister. The thump of her boots drew further away until they only became a memory. Ethan finally spoke up after being uncharacteristically quiet for once. "I didn't know she was your aunt." I shrugged. "She's not, but she's been around as long as I can remember." Ethan nodded a little and suggested we bike around town a bit before it started to get dark. I agreed, and we spent the rest of the afternoon biking in circles around empty parking lots and finding the best hills to speed down. The sun slowly started to wane across the sky, until the dull orange haze from the streetlights signaled for us to bike back. The sickly gray clouds only seemed to darken further with the sun's retreat, the growing wind carrying sparse leaves through the air as we pedaled into the gravel driveway of Ethan's house. Mrs. Crawford was already setting out the plates on the table when we came back inside. We sat down before we could say anything else. She started to pile our plates with helpings of spaghetti and meatballs, with some Caesar salad on the side we only tolerated for the croutons. Dr. Crawford's pager chirped on his belt just as he poured himself a glass of milk from the pitcher. He let out an annoyed sigh and squinted at the screen. He stood up from the table and dialed the number on the kitchen phone. He spoke in a hushed whisper, made eye contact with his wife, and mouthed something, but I couldn't read lips. "All right, I'll be down there as soon as I can. Just see if you can talk her into going with them." He hung up the phone and started to fuss with a leather doctor's bag while shaking his head. "Mrs. Miller fell down the stairs again. Won't let the ambulance take her. She just keeps asking for me. She's gonna break a hip at this rate." Mrs. Crawford grumbled as she swirled a glass of wine. He nodded in exhausted agreement as he started to walk out the door with his bag in hand. "I'll be back later," he said before closing the door behind him. The grandfather clock began to tick a little louder than before as the three of us ate our dinner in a newfound silence. Ethan's mom cleared our dishes and busied herself over the soapy water in the kitchen sink. Once again, we found ourselves in the den, only this time, Ethan had something else to show me. From a small bin of old NES cartridges, he pulled out a Game Genie with bright letters reading Video Game Enhancer. We set up the Super and slotted in Super Mario World. We flipped through all the different stacks of code booklets we got from the book fair, spending some time punching in the sequences of numbers and letters for each cheat code. We took turns passing the turbo controller to each other. At first, we started simple, infinite lives and not losing power-ups. We escalated to making the plumber fly around on the screen and turning him into strange colors. Ethan's mom poked her head into the den with her purse over her shoulder. "I'm gonna go to the store real quick. The deadbolt key's in the kitchen if you need it. Don't answer the door to strangers, you know that." She reminded him, and Ethan let out an exasperated, "Okay, Mom," without taking his eyes off the screen. She let out a sigh and swung the door open. The sound of rain softly pelting the front patio flowed from the open doorway. The double click from the front door's locks as they turned in place, and the hum of her car leaving the driveway signaled her farewell. Ethan laughed as this new code was turning Mario entirely red and making his body contort and flex unnaturally in place. I decided to stand up and walk to the kitchen for an ice cream sandwich. The only light in the house came from the den in the kitchen. The rain's onslaught increased its volume as it assaulted the roof with a steady hum. I walked back towards the den, but something made me stop. Something that wasn't there before stretched as a shadow across the floor. I wanted to think it was just paranoia, but my doubts started to burn away when the shape from the porch light shifted ever so slightly. I inched closer to the door and put my eye to the peephole and gazed out at the porch. I felt my heartbeat start to pound in my chest. In the rain and the uncertain glow from the front light, a man in a bathrobe stood on the porch. I felt my chest tighten like a noose when I recognized his face. In his wrinkled hands, he held an ordinary splitting axe. The downpour pelted him and soaked his messy hair, but he didn't seem to care. His mouth hung open like he had forgotten how to close it, but he didn't say a word. His glassy eyes stared forward blankly, bloodshot like he hadn't blinked in days. The stranger casually reached for the door and turned the knob. The door only clicked but didn't open. I slid the chain into place, but I wasn't sure if it would even matter at this point. The man's eyes never left the door. I thought he was staring right into me, like he knew I was watching. I stepped back from the door towards the den, slowly, like he might be able to hear me from the other side. "Ethan! Ethan!" I whispered gravely. I felt Ethan's eyes on the back of my head, but he didn't say anything. "There's someone on the porch." Ethan mutely joined my side. Just as he was about to look through the peephole, the shadow on the floor shifted and started to drift towards the side of the house. A dark figure passed by the half-curtained windows. Ethan ran towards the kitchen, yanking the phone from its resting place. He dialed with trembling fingers as his eyes darted around. I followed him close by. Instead, my eyes drifted to the knife block by the sink. I slid in the largest knife I could find from its place and held it tightly in my pale palms. A woman's monotone voice read out a flat greeting from the phone. I looked out the back patio and I could see a silhouette from the edge of the light, patiently climbing the patio stairs. I yanked Ethan away from the phone and pulled him toward the guest's room. The receiver swayed off the hook with the voice on the other end asking if we needed help. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, but I wasn't sure the flimsy interior door would even slow him down. I noticed the tall bookshelf full of heavy novels and strange little knickknacks. "Help me push it," I whispered as tears started to blur my vision. Ethan breathed shallowly next to me as we mustered up the strength to push the cumbersome bookshelf in front of the door. The hardwood floor squeaked in protest as we braced it as close as we could. The sound of glass shattering from the kitchen dispelled any notion of safety as we dove into a crowded closet. I put a hand over my mouth to silence my heavy breathing as tears rolled down my chin. I listened for any sounds from outside. The soft but deafening pitter-patter of bare feet on broken glass. From the den, I could still hear the bouncing, joyful, looping theme from Donut Plains, never ceasing. Ethan bit his own fingers hard enough to draw blood. As I could hear the doorknob turn. After a short pause, the barricade trembled as something heavy and sharp struck it hard. The barrier shuddered as the axe slammed into it again. The bookshelf creaked as some of the books tumbled to the floor. I thought it would hold just for a moment, but I was proven wrong when I heard the sound of splitting wood. I clenched my teeth to stop me from screaming as the door started to split apart. The bookshelf shifted like it was being tested. I felt my head pound like a drum when the heavy bookshelf tumbled to the floor with a loud bang. My heart pounded in my ears as I watched the strange man climb through the wreckage of the door. The slits in the closet door let me see him just enough as he looked under the bed for us. His jaws never closed as he hissed like a gas mask. His cloudy eyes focused right at us as he hobbled towards the closet. I didn't realize how much taller he was than Ethan's dad until he was standing right next to us, just outside the closet. I choked down every single sound my body produced, but it didn't seem to matter. He casually reached for the door like he was about to pick out his favorite shirt. We wrapped our hands around the knob as we tried our best to keep him from opening our hiding spot. Our whimpers we couldn't hold back filled the air as we fought a cruel game of tug-of-war. Just as our hands strained from the struggle, he stopped and stood there for a second. I was about to wonder if he had given up when an axe blade crashed through the flimsy door. The closet door folded in half like a deck of cards. Screams ripped through the air, but I couldn't tell if it was me or Ethan. The man's eyes stared ahead at the hangers, but his hands reached right for us. I don't even remember doing it. My hand suddenly thrust the kitchen knife deep into the man's belly. He let out a muffled choke and crashed into a nearby nightstand, the knife still buried deep into his gut. The man's body slumped against the wall next to the broken lamp. Blood pooled down the handle. My chest heaved, but no matter how hard I breathed, I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. Ethan stared at the man's body with wide eyes, but he didn't say anything. From outside, I could hear the shrill cry of approaching sirens. We dragged ourselves to the kitchen. Ethan dug through the junk drawer for the deadbolt key. The double sliding door to the patio was completely smashed in. Blood smears and shards of glass painted the welcome mat. I thought about booking it from that way, but neither of us had shoes on. Just when I was about to ask my friend if he had found the key, I heard a shuffling from inside our previous hiding spot. A bloodied hand wrapped around the butchered door frame. Ethan let out a curse and ripped out a useless jumble of stamps and rubber bands. He grabbed a handful of loose keys and ran for the front door. Red and blue lights painted the covered windows as we rushed for the door. Ethan tried the first key and let out a cry when the lock didn't turn. The man in the bathrobe limped out of the guest room, still clutching the axe. He limped towards us, even slower than he was before. Blood droplets followed him as the dirty bathrobe dragged across the floor. I screamed at him to get the door open. Ethan slid in another. The door wouldn't click. The cold, rainy air filled our lungs as we sprinted outside. A squad car screamed into the driveway with its light bars flashing. A car door opened and the beam of a flashlight fell upon us. A man's voice that I almost recognized called out to us. The gravel dug into my bare feet as I ran towards the flashing lights. "I got kids running," I heard the deputy say into his radio. "There's someone in our house," I managed to blurt out when we got close enough to the deputy. "Where are they now?" he asked firmly, the beam of his flashlight silhouetting him. Ethan only pointed at the front door. The beam of the lawman's flashlight swung towards the patio. In the doorway, the man in the bathrobe was still there. The deputy's hand went to his holster as he spoke into his shoulder mic. "One armed with an axe, send me more cars." He looked down at us and said, "Get behind me." We huddled close behind him as his fingers unclipped his holster. He drew his pistol and whispered, "Close your eyes." Ethan shut his eyes and tried to bury his face into his jacket. I don't know why, but my eyelids refused to shut. I felt the cold rain pelt my forehead as the deputy's voice shouted across the driveway.
"Sheriff's office! Drop it now! Drop it!"
The lawman's voice cracked with adrenaline as he braced his pistol across the frame of his car door. The man didn't stop as he continued to limp forward. The hilt of the kitchen knife peeked out from the blood-stained bathrobe.
"Get on the ground! Stop right there!"
The deputy barked again as he tightened his grip on his gun. The axe blade glinted under the porch light as he carefully started to go down the stairs, but his foot never left the last step. The roar of gunfire cascaded in the night. My ears rang as screams I couldn't tell whether they were mine or Ethan's filled the air. Casings peppered the windshield and the hood of the patrol car. The pounding of the gunfire halted just for a moment with a deafening click. The deputy cursed under his breath. He racked the slide back and let it slam forward. A single unspent round skittered across the gravel. One last shot rang out. The man in the bathrobe thumped to the ground like a marionette with his strings cut. The axe tumbled down the stairs as a dark line of urine pooled down his pant leg. The deputy let out a few shaky breaths as he reached for his shoulder mic. He was out of breath like he had just run for miles. "Shots fired. Suspect down. Roll EMS." He approached the fallen man with his pistol aimed at him, still shouting commands at him as his radio squawked with half-clipped voices. The howl of more sirens approached from somewhere nearby as the deputy kicked away the axe. He turned over his limp body with his boot and reached for his duty belt. The handcuffs clicked as they snapped in place. I didn't realize how much blood there was until I saw the gaping hole in the back of his head. 3 more squad cars sped around the corner and skidded to a halt in the driveway. Responding deputies held shotguns and revolvers low as they rushed towards the house. One of the deputies stopped and turned to us, but I couldn't see who it was. A familiar voice called out to me, "Clyde." The voice of Jan seemed surreal to me now, like I couldn't believe it existed here. She clutched a .357 with the same hands she handed me poppin' hot dogs at department barbecues in the park. She holstered her revolver and started to usher us away towards her car. My ears rang, but I could hear gentle murmurs from her, but I really couldn't make out anything. Ethan couldn't stop staring at the porch, and neither could I. I don't remember what she said, but she pushed a teddy bear dressed up in a police uniform into my hands, and I squeezed it tight like my life depended on it. An ambulance drove up with its lights flashing. The crew stepped out with their jump bags and walked towards the body. The EMT knelt down and checked his pulse with 2 fingers while listening to his chest with her stethoscope. She shook her head at the paramedic standing nearby. The paramedic nodded and started to walk away, peeling off his gloves as he talked into the mic across his chest casually. "Hey Doc, Rescue 3 here. On the scene of a OES for an unresponsive male with multiple GSWs. He waited for a moment before an older voice cut through the static.
"Time of death, 9:34 p.m.
Copy that, Dr. Morris. Appreciate it. I saw the headlights from Mrs. Crawford's car cut across the light bars. The last thing I remember was the awful scream that ripped through her throat as she saw her driveway crowded with police cars and a corpse lying in her front yard. "That's enough for now, Clyde," a gentle voice said to me. I looked up across from me. Nora still sat there with a soft smile. She pushed a box of tissues across the metal table when my vision started to blur. A dull, incessant tapping filled the room. At first, I thought it was from her tape recorder, but I was wrong. From one of the tiny windows, the pitch-black form of a raven stared in. His body swallowed the moonlight as he pecked rhythmically on the window. Tap, tap, tap.